And every day, I can tell you, we keep discovering new things. Because the system that was in place, I like to use a metaphor and say it was like a big knot that we found. You untie one and another appears.
Burkina Faso just did what no African government has dared before. It passed a law forcing every company making over $8.8 million a year to build its headquarters inside the country, or leave. No more foreign firms running gold mines from Paris or managing telecom empires from Abidjan. 6 months, that's the deadline. Build here, hire here, pay here, or get out. It's not just a policy, it's a punch to the gut of Africa's economic dependency. And it's coming straight from Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the man turning Burkina Faso into the front line of Africa's new economic revolution. Let's get into it. No one expected it to drop this fast. One moment, the chatter in West African business circles was about gold exports and logistics reforms, and the next, Burkina Faso's Council of Ministers unveiled a decree that sent tremors across boardrooms from Paris to Johannesburg. Under the proposed law, any company earning more than roughly $8.8 million in annual revenue must build its headquarters inside Burkina Faso. Not a branch office, not a liaison desk, a full-fledged command center, complete with staff, infrastructure, and taxes paid on Burkinabé soil. It was the kind of policy announcement that doesn't just make headlines, it changes the atmosphere. Within hours, private chambers, mining associations, and trade envoys were scrambling to interpret what it meant. Could they still operate from abroad? Would existing foreign offices count? Was this really happening? The answer from Ouagadougou was clear and unshakable. Yes, it's happening, and it's staying. The details were as sharp as the message. Once enacted, companies will have 6 months to submit their real estate construction plans, proving that they intend to comply. To ease the transition, the government is offering tax exemptions on building materials and import duties, alongside streamlined approvals from local authorities. The Urban Planning Ministry has been instructed to fast-track building permits and eliminate administrative deadlocks that, in the past, made investors wait years for land rights. But what really caught analysts off guard wasn't the economic fine print. It was the philosophy behind it. This wasn't just a legal reform. It was a political manifesto disguised as an urban development strategy. The government didn't couch it in diplomatic language. It said it openly. The purpose is to enhance economic integration, stimulate real estate investment, and strengthen national sovereignty. That last phrase, national sovereignty, is where everything shifts. For decades, Burkina Faso has been treated as a resource pool without a corporate backbone. Gold mined here funded stock exchanges elsewhere. Telecom revenues collected in Ouagadougou were booked in Côte d'Ivoire. Banks lent to Burkinabé farmers but paid dividends in Paris. Traoré's administration looked at that imbalance and asked the one question every African leader had avoided for too long. How can a country be independent when its economy lives abroad? This law is the answer, a demand that companies align their physical presence with their profits. If you make billions here, you build here. You employ locally, pay locally, and leave a footprint larger than a logo on a billboard. The state doesn't just want taxes, it wants visibility, accountability, and permanence. The shock of it all lies in its timing. Burkina Faso is not announcing this from a position of weakness. The country has already turned away IMF offers, tightened control over its gold production, and redirected its trade partnerships toward regional allies. The new law is the next phase, not reactionary, but evolutionary. It's designed to make sure that when economic growth accelerates, it doesn't leak out through foreign offices but circulates within Burkinabé cities. And make no mistake, this isn't just about buildings. It's about re-engineering the flow of power. A company headquartered abroad can always threaten to leave when politics turn uncomfortable. A company that's built its infrastructure, hired hundreds, and embedded itself into local grids can't leave so easily. In a sense, this policy isn't trapping corporations. It's binding them to the future of the nation they profit from. But what makes this even more interesting, and perhaps unsettling to foreign investors, is that this law wasn't drafted in isolation. It's part of a broader strategy that's been quietly brewing in the capital. A strategy to transform Burkina Faso from an extraction hub into a center of ownership. Now the question arises, what made Traoré's government so bold, so confident, that it dared to take this step when no other African administration had the courage? How did a landlocked nation decide it could rewrite the rules of investment that even coastal giants avoided challenging? Every revolutionary law begins with a silent buildup, years of frustration, unequal deals, and invisible thefts that accumulate like pressure under a stone until something snaps. Burkina Faso's headquarters decree didn't come out of thin air. It is the inevitable result of decades of economic exploitation dressed as partnership. When Captain Ibrahim Traoré's administration looked at the books, they didn't just see numbers. They saw a story of systemic plunder that had outlived colonialism itself. For years, Burkina Faso's economy looked deceptively alive on paper. Gold exports surged, telecom subscriptions exploded, and banks reported record revenues. But beneath the surface, the nation was bleeding wealth at every turn. Multinationals operating in the country kept their profit centers abroad, while their local branches existed merely to maintain appearances. They paid modest operational taxes, but shifted their real earnings through transfer pricing, internal accounting tricks that allowed them to declare inflated management fees to their foreign parent companies. The result was tragicomic. The land that produced the gold saw none of its glitter. Traoré's team, composed of economists and military reformists, began tracing where every dollar of Burkina Faso's export wealth actually went. What they discovered wasn't just leakage. It was an entire economic architecture designed to keep Africa dependent. When Burkinabé gold was sold on international markets, the trade was often managed through foreign brokers. When telecommunication firms expanded, their infrastructure loans came from European banks that charged interest rates higher than domestic rates. Even the NGOs claiming to develop local capacity were routing donor funds through offshore administrative offices. It was a perfect system, perfect for everyone except Burkinabé citizens. That realization marked the breaking point. The leadership concluded that political independence meant little without economic domestication of wealth. The country could not keep talking about sovereignty while its corporate elites attended board meetings in Abidjan and deposited profits in Geneva. The headquarters law is therefore less about construction and more about confrontation, a direct challenge to a post-colonial order that allowed foreign interests to control African economies from afar while paying moral lip service to development. But this defiance didn't spring purely from anger. It was driven by calculation. Traoré's advisors understood that the global landscape was shifting. The COVID-19 pandemic, the war in Ukraine, and the rise of BRICS economies had already destabilized the global supply chain model that relied on cheap African extraction. New alliances were forming, and Burkina Faso saw an opening to reclaim control over its own capital flows. Building local headquarters means forcing these companies to reinvest domestically. They must buy local land, employ local architects, hire local accountants, and pay local power bills. Each act of compliance becomes a redistribution mechanism. Still, the move also exposes the courage of timing. Burkina Faso is no stranger to retaliation. When the country expelled foreign troops and refused IMF funding, critics in Western media predicted economic collapse. Instead, it maintained stability through regional cooperation, gold nationalization, and agricultural expansion. Having survived those storms, the government realized something profound. The West's threats of isolation no longer carry the same power. The world's financial poles are diversifying, and Ouagadougou has friends in Moscow, Beijing, and Bamako who understand the logic of sovereignty through ownership. Yet, what gives this policy its true emotional weight isn't foreign politics. It's the domestic memory of neglect. Ask the miners in Houndé, the traders in Bobo Dioulasso, or the graduates in Ouagadougou's universities. They all share the same frustration. Our resources make others rich. For them, the headquarters law isn't a bureaucratic rule. It's revenge by reason, a long-delayed correction of history. It is a demand that profit must have a postal code, and that postal code must finally read Burkina Faso. And perhaps that's what sets this apart from any ordinary reform. This law was not crafted in boardrooms. It was born in bitterness, in the lived experiences of millions watching their labor feed invisible empires. The government didn't draft it as policy. It forged it as payback. The logic was simple. If we cannot chase the profits abroad, we will make the profits come home. But that sparks another question. Now that Burkina Faso has dragged its economy back onto its own soil, What happens to the landscape itself? Can this radical redirection of corporate power translate into tangible transformation, roads, jobs, skylines, or will it remain symbolic? Let's pause for a second to say big thank you to the Black Culture Diary community, where Black voices, stories, and legacies are preserved and amplified. By becoming a member, you're not just supporting the channel, you're becoming part of a powerful cultural movement. Let's continue. Even before the law's full enforcement, local municipalities have begun preparing for the inevitable construction surge. The Ministry of Urban Development has identified zones across Ouagadougou, Bobo Dioulasso, and Fada Ngourma for what insiders are calling the new economic map, an organized network of corporate headquarters that will redefine how the country's cities breathe and grow. These are not symbolic gestures. Every company ordered to build will need architects, engineers, masons, suppliers, and local planners. That means jobs, thousands of them, and a construction economy that no longer depends on foreign contractors flying in with imported materials and leaving once paid. The ripple effect could be massive. A single headquarters project worth a few billion CFA will require local cement, steel, paint, and energy, all sourced within the nation's industrial ecosystem. This is how the Burkinabé economy begins to loop on itself, creating circulation instead of leakage. Local transport companies will haul materials, small-scale enterprises will supply equipment, and real estate developers will expand into new territories. Each corporate tower becomes not just a symbol of compliance, but a generator of domestic industry. For the first time in modern history, the private sector's growth won't just show up in balance sheets, it will rise physically from the soil. Urban planners are calling this moment a national urban awakening. For decades, the country's capital expanded haphazardly. Informal settlements grew faster than public infrastructure, and cities were built around administration rather than ambition. This law flips that logic. It's no longer the government's role alone to develop cities. Private giants who profit from the nation must now invest in its modernity. Imagine the transformation. Ouagadougou's industrial edges morphing into glass-walled business districts. New roads and power lines built not through loans, but through necessity. Local universities producing architects and civil engineers who design the nation's next skyline. But the vision doesn't stop at urban renewal. The government knows that architecture carries identity. Each headquarters will be required to integrate local design aesthetics, traditional Sahelian facades, solar-efficient structures, and environmentally conscious layouts that reflect the values of modern Africa. It's not just about copying Western skylines. It's about redefining what an African business capital looks like when it belongs to Africans. The Ministry of Environment has already hinted that companies adopting green construction practices could receive extended tax exemptions, encouraging sustainable growth that blends economy with ecology. What's most intriguing is the long-term political dimension hidden inside this transformation. Every company that builds here is tying its fortunes to the land. A foreign corporation that invests millions in Burkinabé real estate is less likely to fund political instability or backdoor interference. Their capital becomes the country's anchor, and Traoré knows this. The more headquarters rise, the harder it becomes for external powers to manipulate national policy through economic pressure. It's a genius move in quiet warfare. Replace external dependency with internal stakeholding. And as cranes prepare to pierce the sky, another question begins to surface. If this is the visible result of economic sovereignty, what deeper principle drives it? What kind of ideology dares to merge national pride with corporate obligation and turns infrastructure into political resistance? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video, and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. Every revolution needs a doctrine, a logic that transforms resistance into policy and outrage into structure. For Captain Ibrahim Traoré, that doctrine is crystal clear. Sovereignty must be tangible, not rhetorical. It must exist in factories, banks, refineries, and now in headquarters that stand on the same soil as the workers who make those profits possible. What began as a law about construction is, in truth, the architectural expression of a national ideology. Burkina Faso will never again rent its future from outsiders. When Traoré speaks of sovereignty, he isn't invoking vague nationalism. He is redefining the concept itself. In his view, Africa lost not because it lacked courage, but because it allowed others to own its infrastructure. Nations became politically independent yet economically subcontracted. They printed flags but outsourced control. Every airport, port, mine, and telecom tower run by external entities has turned into invisible chains. So he asked the unthinkable. What if sovereignty was rebuilt from the ground up, through economic laws that physically re-anchor the nation's wealth inside its borders? That is the ideological skeleton of the Headquarters Bill. It forces corporate power to become part of the nation's structure, not its shadow. A building becomes more than architecture. It becomes accountability, an address you can point to, a door you can knock on, a tax office you can audit. Traoré's government is not waging war against capitalism. It is nationalizing responsibility. It's telling every corporate giant, you may operate here, but you will also belong here. This philosophy is rooted in history. Burkina Faso's revolutionary DNA runs deep, from Thomas Sankara's radical self-reliance policies in the 1980s to today's battle for economic dignity. Traoré often channels Sankara's ethos, but replaces ideological slogans with practical structures. Where Sankara told citizens to consume what we produce, Traoré tells corporations to build where you earn. Both aim for the same horizon, a nation that lives from its own labor, not foreign leftovers. The difference lies in execution. Traoré isn't just inspiring citizens. He's forcing global companies to play by those same rules. The deeper brilliance lies in how he ties economics to psychology. The Headquarters Law creates visible monuments to independence, not propaganda, but proof. A young engineer passing a new corporate tower in Ouagadougou doesn't just see a building. He sees an inversion of history. For once, it's the multinationals investing in Africa's soil instead of Africa investing in theirs. Each headquarters becomes a quiet assertion that the era of dependency is closing. This is why Traoré's supporters call the policy sovereignty by cement. The ideology isn't just written in speeches, it's carved into skylines. Of course, ideological clarity comes with risk. Foreign investors are wary. Western media frames the reform as economic nationalism that might scare off capital. But to Traoré, that's precisely the point. Any investor who fears fairness is not a partner, they're a parasite. In the government's logic, attracting fewer but committed investors is better than hosting many who exploit and flee. This is why his administration pairs defiance with incentive. Companies that comply will enjoy tax relief, access to local credit, and public support. Those who refuse will lose their foothold in an economy that's learning to breathe without external permission. Behind this, there's a geopolitical signal too. By grounding capital domestically, Burkina Faso becomes harder to destabilize. It's no coincidence that Traoré's doctrine aligns with similar philosophies emerging in Mali and Niger, where leaders also reject dependency and promote local control. Together, they're crafting a new Sahelian identity, one where sovereignty isn't preached but practiced, enforced not by slogans, but by policy. This alliance of minds represents something unseen since Africa's independence movements, a regional consensus that freedom must now be economic. But even doctrines need endurance. For a revolution to last, ideas must expand beyond borders. If Burkina Faso can make this ideology work, if it can turn this law into long-term wealth, the question shifts from why did they do it to who will follow next. When Burkina Faso planted its flag of economic defiance through the Headquarters Law, it didn't just legislate change, it broadcast a challenge. And now that signal is bouncing off African capitals like an echo that refuses to fade. What Traoré's government ignited is not merely a national reform, it's the blueprint for a continental awakening, a prototype of how Africa can reclaim the architecture of its own wealth. The question that began in Ouagadougou, why should companies earn billions here but build abroad, is now being whispered in Niger, Mali, and Chad, and murmured in Ghana, Tanzania, and even South Africa. You can feel it in the tone of regional discourse. Mali's Economic Council recently debated a motion calling for localization of command structures for mining companies operating in Bamako's orbit. Niger's junta, inspired by the Burkinabé precedent, has instructed its Energy Sector Review Board to explore similar reforms for oil contractors in Agadem. Even in Nigeria, Far from the Sahel alliance, public commentators have started asking why multinationals dominate Lagos's economy but route profits through London. One policy in Burkina Faso has triggered a continent-wide introspection, a collective realization that independence without infrastructure is an illusion. This is where Traoré's genius radiates beyond borders. His law isn't meant to isolate. It's designed to infect, to spread the idea that sovereignty is contagious. Every African nation facing the same problem of capital flight, tax evasion, and offshore wealth can now point to a living example of resistance that works. For the first time, a small, landlocked nation has made itself the moral superpower of African economics, proving that courage, not size, dictates influence. The implications reach far beyond corporate behavior. If this momentum continues, Africa could enter a new era of inward investment, where nations no longer wait for Western loans to build, but compel their own economic participants to reinvest domestically. Imagine a future where Ghana's cocoa giants, Nigeria's oil majors, and Kenya's fintech leaders are required to base their headquarters in the same cities that generate their profits. Imagine every regional capital, from Dakar to Lusaka, shining not because of foreign aid, but because Africa finally turned its own profits inward. Burkina Faso may have fired the first shot, but the revolution it unleashed could redraw the entire map of African capitalism. But there's another layer, the psychological transformation that follows the physical. Every new Burkinabé headquarters, every African company compelled to build locally, chips away at the inferiority complex engineered by decades of neo-colonial conditioning. It rewires perception. No longer does the average African have to associate wealth with elsewhere. For generations, the richest African firms maintained their prestige by being headquartered in Europe. Now, prestige is returning home. The cities once dismissed as underdeveloped are becoming symbols of arrival, not departure. That shift in collective consciousness is arguably the most powerful currency of all. Yet this movement will not come without friction. Western financial institutions will push back. Foreign lobbyists will attempt to undermine compliance, and local elites with offshore interests will resist quietly from within. But here lies the beauty of Burkina Faso's model. It doesn't rely on permission, it relies on precedent. Once one nation proves that sovereignty can be enforced through policy, others no longer need approval to follow, only courage. And courage, as Traoré has shown, is far more contagious than fear. Across the continent, there's a growing understanding that the struggle for economic independence doesn't require wars or coups. It requires laws that trap wealth where it's created. It's a subtler, smarter revolution that replaces slogans with signatures and weapons with blueprints. Traoré has shown that power can be built literally, with foundations, not favors. And that brings us to the ultimate question. How long before the rest of Africa realizes that this isn't just Burkina Faso's fight, it's everyone's? Because if even one country can compel billion-dollar corporations to build, pay, and exist locally, then what excuse do larger, wealthier nations have? The answer will define Africa's next 50 years. Burkina Faso has drawn the first line on the continent's economic map. The only thing left is for others to pick up the pieces and redraw their own destinies. Do you think other African nations should follow Burkina Faso's lead and force companies to build where they profit? Let us know in the comments section. Should foreign corporations that refuse be banned from African markets altogether? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.